Did you know that the over 750 fiat currencies that have been created since 1700, only 20% still exist today? And guess what? With the ones that still exist today, the majority of them have all lost the majority of their purchasing power, down over 90%. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing right now is a rapid race to the new global reserve currency and a new global payment system. People that have came before me have been warning about this for years, but we are now closer than ever. And in this video, I'm going to go over what we can learn from history with this and also the new developments that is happening right now that is accelerating this race to a new global payment system. And people, this video is for everyone, because unfortunately the average Joe and Jane has no idea what's coming. They have no idea what has happened to fiat currencies, aka their money in their bank account in the past, and they are ill prepared for what will be coming in the future. But don't worry, at the end of this video, so you're definitely going to want to watch till the end, I'll go over exactly how to prepare and protect your wealth against what could be a currency collapsing in your country, because we're seeing this happening in more and more countries right now. It's only a matter of time before it comes to a country near you. So we've definitely got a lot to unpack and to go over in today's video, so let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so first things first, a quick history lesson. What we used to have in the US was something called the gold reserve. It's where your money in the bank used to be backed 1-to-1 in gold. And this fiat currency, these notes and these coins were just mere IOUs and were just a convenient way for people to exchange their currency and exchange the value of their gold without having to all of a sudden chip gold or trying to find a way to break it down for small transactions. The currency itself and the notes and the IOUs had no intrinsic value and were never meant to be real money. They were just means of conveniently exchanging value. But the banks and the government had a problem. They couldn't keep printing more and more money because they had to back it 1-for-1 for gold. So in 1933, President Roosevelt started to create what we now know is the new global payment system and the new fiat currency system. He planted the seed there in 1933 and began to drop the reserve requirements for gold to fiat currency assets. And it wasn't until 1971 where the US completely came off the gold standard altogether. And since then, with no longer having to have gold to back their currency, every crisis, every recession, the government has been able to print more and more money and create more and more debt without limits. But now we're about to enter into a new age of digital currencies where your digits on your bank account, the money in your bank, isn't even backed by this worthless paper anymore. Now, for those watching this video, all they've known is the US holding world reserve currency status all their life. But it hasn't been like this, and this is only a very short moment in time. For example, in 1650, the Dutch Empire held the world reserve currency status, and they were the greatest empire and the greatest economy in the world. Then in 1850, the British Empire held world reserve currency status and were the greatest economic machine throughout the world. So just because the US has world reserve currency status now, this is not going to be the case forever. And I'm about to get into the new events that are starting to challenge the US as a world reserve currency status. And what we are also starting to see with the US is they're being very reckless and they're being very irresponsible with the great power that they have. And we all know the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. So what are some key events that are happening right now, and what are some other currencies or some other global payment systems that are starting to rise and try to challenge the almighty US dollar? Let's have a look. Well, first things first, everyone, what we're seeing right now is the petrodollar have a slow decline. Listen to this. Russia is considering selling its oil and gas for Bitcoin as sanctions intensify from the West. This is absolutely massive, everyone. And it's not just this happening right now. And it's not just Russia considering selling their oil in a different currency besides the US dollar. And it's because the US dollar, or what many people call it, the petrodollar, the reason why it hasn't lost more value and the US hasn't seen more inflation is because all oil has had to be traded in US dollars. So there's always been more and more demand from it, even though they've been very reckless with the US dollar currency by printing 80% of all US dollars in existence over the past 2 years. So one of the new challenges we've seen rise right now and try to become a new global payment system is Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is very new, it's in its infant stage, and it is nowhere near rivaling the US dollar right now, but it is still very early days, and it does have potential with new technology, with new scaling solutions like the Lightning Network to make transactions easier, faster, and cheaper. We've also seen people that have been debanked or that have bank accounts frozen, like what's happened in Canada. They've rushed to alternative payment systems like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies to get away from the tyrannical banking system that is becoming more and more politicized. And if you don't agree with whatever political belief that bank has, they can shut off your bank account like that. What we've also seen in Russia and Ukraine is people haven't been able to take money out of their bank account, or they haven't been able to get money sent to them from overseas. So what we've seen over $100 million of donations from people to Ukraine with cryptocurrency. And even if Bitcoin and cryptocurrency haven't proven itself yet, have the potential to fix the majority of the problems in the banking system. Now, while we're talking about a new global payment system, currency debasement, and crazy inflation and people losing their purchasing power, investors are now facing a dilemma. Inflation is at a 40-year high and the Federal Reserve is tightening up. Some top firms predict stock market returns may be only an average of 5% over the next decade. As a result, a recent JP Morgan report declared alternative assets are no longer optional. And of all the platforms that offer alternative asset, there's one that is no-brainer. That is today's video sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks has solidified itself as a platform for investing in contemporary art. You can access exclusive investments from names like Banksy and Picasso. But the problem for retail investors is they haven't been able to access this art market, with art pieces costing in the millions. But Masterworks have solved this problem, and you can now invest in art for just a fraction of the price to what billionaires pay. Because roughly 2/3 of billionaires allocate portions of their overall portfolio to art as a way to diversify, and because it's a natural inflation hedge. And contemporary art prices have outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021. Since 2020, Masterworks has sold 3 paintings, with each returning over 30% net IRR to investors, and their new offerings usually sell out in hours. If you want to get in early, go to masterworks.io, create an account, check out what they have, and invest in their offerings. And it's normally a waitlist, but for my subscribers, if you use my link in the description, you get to skip the waiting list and start investing today. Thanks for Masterworks for sponsoring this video. Now back to the content. Now you may think, okay, well that's just Russia and other countries aren't doing this. Well, it's not just Russia, everyone. Listen to this. Saudi Arabia considers accepting yuan instead of dollars for its Chinese oil sales. What are these countries starting to see, everyone? Are they starting to see a decline of the US dollar? And do they want diversification against a currency that is being devalued heavily? I think they know the writing is on the wall and it's only a matter of time. And we're starting to see things like this, everyone. Russian central bank to restart buying gold from banks and will pay a fixed price from March 28th. So what we're starting to see around the world is central banks are starting to add gold to their portfolios and starting to add gold reserves yet again. But it's not only Bitcoin, the yuan, and gold. What we are also about to head into is a new age of digital currencies, and more specifically, central bank digital currencies. What I think governments and central banks are doing is they know fiat currency is on the way out, or they know this current version of fiat currency is dying. And to put it simply, during the next crash, they're not going to be able to print money fast enough. So what the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank is thinking of doing is creating their own central bank digital currency, their own kind of a stable coin where you can create a wallet with the Federal Reserve, and during the next recession, instead of sending out stimulus checks, they can send money to your digital wallet, and then you can spend it in certain locations and may have an expiry date forcing you to spend the money in a specific period of time or specific industries and specific locations. But unfortunately, what I think this will lead to is more financial censorship and more financial control, much more than we're seeing with the banks today. And what I think this is also going to lead to is something called universal basic income, which has been a huge debate over the past 10 years. But unfortunately, I think this is going to come. Now, the problem with high prices is you don't fix high prices with higher prices. And yes, why UBI or universal basic income or stimulus checks fix things in the short term, what they lead to is higher inflation. Kind of like what we're seeing in the US. You know, they said, don't worry, we can print all this money, we can send all these stimulus checks out, we can tell people they don't have to pay back their debt, and there'll be no consequences. Well, everyone, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And these stimulus checks, guess what? You're now paying them back with higher inflation and higher taxes for the government, because there's no way the governments at these rates can repay their debt. So what they have to do is create surging inflation to devalue the debt and increase tax revenue. And now what we're seeing with surging fuel costs, utility costs, and food costs, we're starting to see the early signs of UBI with places like California giving people vouchers or giving people debit cards to go out there and buy fuel. But again, people, this is only going to make the problem worse by, instead of increasing supply, they're increasing demand, which is pretty similar to what they're doing with the housing market as well. Now, what also is the biggest threat for a country or an empire that has world reserve currency status is a rising power. Kind of just like what happened with the Dutch Empire, with the British Empire, there's always been a new rising power which has risen up to challenge the existing world power. And what are we seeing right now, everyone? The rise of China. Not only economically, monetarily, but also the military has been rising rapidly as well. We're also seeing other authoritarian and dictator regimes starting to rise up and become more authoritarian and starting to challenge the West. For example, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So while we've experienced a time of peace and prosperity in the West, it's looking like we may have become a bit complacent and these other regimes are starting to rise up. So if we do enter a new global conflict, the money printing is about to be taken up to a new level. And every time they turn the money printers off to get the same result, there is something called the law of diminishing returns. So what we're seeing during every economic downturn or every war, they have to print 10 times the amount they did to get the same result as last time. For example, in 2008, the government did about $700 to $800 billion in bailouts, but during the 2020 recession, they did about $7 to $8 trillion of economic support. So what we could see during the next crisis is we could see headlines of the Federal Reserve starts printing hundreds of trillions of dollars. And I think that's a day when the US will officially lose world reserve currency status, and we will see people wake up and say, look, I need to get out of this fiat currency and find a new global payment system. So I know what you're thinking, well, okay, well, how can I protect myself against this scenario? Well, everyone, first things first, we have to learn from history, like I showed you at the start of the video. And a currency, money that has stood the test of time over the past 5,000 years, is gold. It doesn't matter what new fiat currency system will be created, what digital currency system will be created, gold will always have value. That is why I personally hold gold in my portfolio to hedge myself against this possible scenario. It may not be the greatest performing asset, but I know no matter what happens, it will always have value. Now, what you should also have done before you even start thinking about in the markets is have your debt paid off, have an emergency fund, and have emergency food storage and every other main essentials that you'll need in everyday life. Because what we're seeing in other countries like Argentina, Venezuela, and Turkey, for example, when their currency starts collapsing, basic essential items start to skyrocket, and simple items like food, guess what? Their prices will be outperforming even the stock market. Also, something that has stood the test of time and will always increase in value no matter what currency there is land. And even better, farmland that produces food. Because if food prices start to go parabolic, guess what? That land is going to become very, very valuable. Now, some more speculative plays that I'm also doing with my portfolio. This is not financial advice. This is something a bit more risky, but also has a potential for even bigger returns. It's like I talked about earlier in this video, things like contemporary art, they've always been valued throughout history. And what I'm also doing, which has not stood the test of time, but I have seen real promise and real potential, is Bitcoin. Now, this is much more speculative. That's why I'm not saying don't go all in. Just have a little bit of that in your portfolio, which has the potential to have greater returns than inflation of what we're experiencing right now. Real inflation is 16%. And over the past 10 years, it has massively outpaced the price appreciation of gold, land, and stocks. But me, I like diversification. I don't like going all in one asset class. So we'll also be allocating a bit of my portfolio to the S&P 500 as well, or a global stock market ETF. That way, if we do have a potential stock market melt up or crash up, I have a way to hedge myself against that scenario as well. And me investing in a broad basket of assets, it reduces my portfolio's volatility and reduces my downside risk. Now, again, everyone, I just want to reiterate, I'm not predicting this is going to happen next month, next year. Nobody can know the time when it'll come. But guess what? When it does come, it'll happen so quick, you won't have time to prepare. And there's an old saying, it's better be prepared 10 years too early than one day too late. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.